It's officially been 5 years since development of Metroid Prime 4 was scrapped and restarted with Retro Studios at the helm. And since then, we found out literally nothing about the game, aside from this Twitter banner. No doubt, half a decade without any solid information about Metroid Prime 4 is frustrating, but there are so many games to play that give off those Metroid vibes. Heck, there have even been 2 games in the series released since that reboot in the form of Metroid Dread and Prime Remastered. That said, there are other games from different franchises that are great to play while waiting for Metroid Prime 4. Starting with Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. It's a very recent game, it just came out this month. I even reviewed it here on the channel, and let me tell you, if you love Metroid, especially Metroid Dread, you have got to get this game if you haven't already. It's available on all platforms. If anything, I'd kind of describe it as similar to Metroid Dread, but with a deeper combat system and wild platforming puzzles. And some of these platforming sections are very challenging, putting even games like Celeste and Super Meat Boy to shame. Okay, they're probably not as hard as those games, but they're still challenging. Even still, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown has the classic Metroidvania elements of getting these things called time powers and using them to unlock more of the incredibly large map. Yeah, this map is freaking huge. So much so that it could take you up to 20 hours to beat the game. It took me about 15 since I focused mainly on the story quest, but that brings me to another topic, is that there are RPG elements entwined in this game, such as a shop system where you can buy things like amulets to get unique powers, but there are also side quests that have you explore the map, finding other items and bosses, and rewarding certain upgrades once you complete them. And while this may appeal to Prince of Persia fans who've been waiting for a new game for over a decade, I'm certain most Metroid fans will find something of value in The Lost Crown. Now let's move on to my favorite superhero game franchise of all time, the Batman Arkham games. It was wild when Batman Arkham Asylum came out to critical acclaim, and you could kind of thank Metroid for that, because Asylum takes a lot of inspiration from the Metroid series. Batman gets trapped by the Joker in Arkham Asylum, going through all kinds of corridors, finding new gear to open areas he couldn't access before. Sound familiar? Now I'm talking specifically about Asylum because it's perhaps the most like Metroid since it's set in that smaller area, but even the open world entries that came after are still exceptional games that continue this Metroidvania kind of gameplay. Yes, even Arkham Origins. Don't forget about Arkham Origins because it's fantastic. Probably part of the reason why I love these games so much is that they are essentially Metroid games, but with Batman as the player character. That said, he can do things that Samus can't do in her respective games, such as take on hordes of enemies with his bare hands. The combat systems in these games are absolutely fantastic, with satisfying combos and counter moves. And given that the Batman Arkham Trilogy just came out on Switch, it's a great time to revisit these games. Except maybe Arkham Knight on Switch. That is not a very great version of the game, but you should still play it if you can get it on other platforms. Now, if you're looking for something a bit more on the retro side, look no further than the Axiom Verge duology. And these games are made mostly by one guy, Thomas Happ. And as you can tell, there's some very clear Super Metroid inspiration here, at least with the first game. The second game changed some things up, but in both titles, you explore alien worlds, uncovering the mysteries surrounding them, while also taking on a bunch of enemies and solving unique puzzles. Axiom Verge 1 is a lot more like Metroid in the sense that the protagonist is equipped with a projectile weapon, much like Samus, but the sequel limits you to mainly melee weapons and a killer boomerang. Speaking of killer, the soundtracks in these games are absolutely iconic, with some really cool electronic beats that you can't help but bob your head to. So while Axiom Verge definitely takes inspiration from 2D Metroid games, they still have their own unique style, and they are definitely worth checking out. I don't feel like the new Tomb Raider games are talked about enough. Specifically, the Reboot trilogy started with Tomb Raider 2013. Because during the great Metroid drought of the 2010s, while I was thirsting for the next game in the series, these 3 titles helped fill that Metroid-sized void in my heart. They are fantastic exploration games with epic set pieces and gorgeous visuals, but there's something about them that gives me Metroid vibes. Of course, it could be the fact that you get gear as you keep playing that lets you access areas you couldn't have before. That's certainly a classic Metroid trope, but these areas are filled with secrets that you can find, some of which are tombs. That's right, you raid tombs in this game, who'd have thought? These tombs are essentially giant puzzles that, when completed, reward substantial upgrades that make Lara more powerful. I know Tomb Raider is a classic franchise on its own, but these new games feel like Uncharted and Metroid had a baby, and it is such a great combination. Next we have Returnal, which isn't exactly a Metroidvania, it's a roguelike, which doesn't really feel like a Metroid kind of genre, so stay with me on this. It is a roguelike, yes, but it's more than that. During every run, you can find lore in each biome that gives us some information about the hostile world you're in, even if it's vague. And let me tell you, the story in this game does not spoon-feed you information. I remember beating this game 2 years ago, and I still don't know what the heck happened in it, but that didn't take away from how great it was. And it is kind of like a Metroid game in that you play as a space explorer who crash lands on a mysterious planet with all kinds of aliens trying to kill her, but it actually does tie in some Metroid elements, where you can find gear that'll stick with you in each run, such as a grappling hook that will unlock shortcuts to the next biome, or get to previously unreachable areas to acquire upgrades that'll help throughout the run. So you could kind of say Returnal is a roguelike with Metroidvania elements, at least that's what I like to call it. But keeping things to the sci-fi genre, let's talk about Star Wars, because if you like Metroid and you like George Lucas's creation, then you have to play the Star Wars Jedi games if you haven't already, as these games share a lot in common with Metroid. For starters, the main character, Cal Kestis, will discover or rediscover new force powers that will help him unlock new areas. And if you don't remember where those areas were, the map is very handy as it highlights spots in red if you can't access them, or green if you can. And if you don't believe me that these games have Metroid influences, look at this scene from Jedi Survivor. That's just ripped straight out of Super Metroid. However, combat is very different from the Metroid games, as you're equipped with a lightsaber, and oh look at that, the game is Dark Souls, but with a lightsaber. Just take my money right now. Have you ever wanted a Metroid game that was just super frickin' weird? Well, look no further than Control, set in the glorious Remedy universe alongside Alan Wake, but don't worry, you can start with Control. It takes place inside a government organization called the Federal Bureau of Control, and it is really weird. You come across some very strange paranatural anomalies, enemies, all kinds of strange stuff that I still don't even know how to describe. It's sort of in a cosmic horror genre of its own, even though it's not that horrific. But putting that to the side, you play as the director of the Bureau, Jessie Faden, and she has one weapon called the Director's Pistol that has multiple forms like a machine gun, a shotgun, all that good stuff, and it even gives her access to unique abilities that will help her unlock new areas, just like a Metroid game. There's also a lot of optional side quests that will greatly expand what you see and do in this strange universe. Finally, you might have noticed I've been using the term Metroidvania a few times in this video, and you might ask, why did I put Vania at the end of Metroid? Well, that's because we're going to talk about Castlevania. Half of the reason why this genre is so popular. It chronicles the Belmont family and their never-ending battle against Dracula and his forces of evil. The search-action formula of the Castlevania series really began with the second one, but Symphony of the Night might be the best place to start, as it's universally praised for a reason. Either that, or you could pick up the Castlevania Advance Collection, which includes the 3 games released on Game Boy Advance, which are spectacular in their own special ways. Oh, and Dracula X is here too. Here you're going to be using a lot of whips to kill monsters as you travel across all kinds of haunted environments, and it's just a dang good time. Also bonus points for Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, as it's a spiritual successor to those games and features very similar settings and styles of play, so be sure to play that game as well if you're looking for more Castlevania goodness. But those are a few games and series that I recommend playing while you wait for Metroid Prime 4. We're already in the 5th year of this game being in development, so hopefully we won't have to wait too much longer just to see something of it, you know? I am dying over here, please help me.